Spacegodzilla, a monster that's the result of Godzilla cells, a very devastating creature. And not only devastating in terms of its raw power, but also a kidnapper. What a bastard. But Spacegodzilla is another one of the more unique monsters during the Heisei series. You know, the video we spoke about yesterday, we discussed Biollante and how unique she was. Well, while Spacegodzilla has his own uniqueness, he actually draws some inspiration from Biollante. When you look at the tusk, in fact, the character was designed as a homage to the monster, incorporating the tusk, as I mentioned, and a hissing roar very reminiscent of Biollante as well. The designer, Shinji Nikishikawa, had initially envisioned Spacegodzilla as a much more Western dragon-like creature with large fin-like wings on its back. Other early designs for the proposed Astro Godzilla included it being an albino Godzilla with expansive wings, two tails, and the ability to fire an ice ray. Another design for Spacegodzilla had the character be a quadruped, or a much more Biollante-like monster commanding a horde of cosmic dragonflies. The final design bore greater resemblance to Godzilla's final form from the video game Super Godzilla, which was also designed by Nishikawa. Special effects artist Koichi Kawakita decided to incorporate crystals onto the Spacegodzilla design, and added a prominent horn on the creature's head in order to hint at its power and imply it had radar-like abilities. In its debut film, Spacegodzilla's origins are left ambiguous, but it is theorized that it was born through Godzilla cells, transported into space by either Mothra or Biollante, being exposed to the radiation of a black hole. Now, Spacegodzilla was another monster that, well, was really subjected just to one movie, and it wasn't really because of the monster's reception. In fact, he remains to be one of the more popular Godzilla villains, but I guess one of the reasons I could assume, or at least theorize, is that maybe they didn't want to continue making movies with Spacegodzilla in an attempt not to confuse certain audience members that were maybe newer to the series. You know, seeing two very similar looking monsters on screen. But Spacegodzilla was definitely one of the more powerful kaiju to come along. In fact, one of many powerful kaiju that Godzilla would face during the Heisei series, which would probably explain why everybody always seems to mention how OP Godzilla was in the Heisei series, or at least how OP his atomic breath was. But when you're facing monsters like this, especially ones who kidnap little Godzillas, I mean, I think that's a good reason for him to have that extra oomph in his atomic breath. But going back to Spacegodzilla, this is a monster I definitely can't say was one of my favorites. But again, I have to give a lot of credit to Toho and their teams that they worked with during this era, because it was a very unique design. Even though it was very similar in look to Godzilla, it had enough features about it that made it very unique and kind of made it stand on its own. Then when you consider the special powers regarding the crystals and, you know, bringing them out of the ground and pretty much using the city as its own conductor for power, Spacegodzilla definitely showed that he could wreck it when he had to. And Godzilla did have a challenge on his hand and even needed some assistance. But will we ever see him again? And if we do, will it ever be in the Monsterverse? Will it ever be in the Toho series that they're planning on for the 2020s? Well, it's more than likely that if we do see Spacegodzilla again, it's going to be in the Toho series, should they happen to go forward with doing those movies, which as far as I can tell right now still is the plan. It's not a monster I could ever see in the Monsterverse, even though they seem to be going that extra mile to add a little bit of cheese to the series, which is perfectly fine with me. I still think Spacegodzilla would be too much of an ask for general audience members to accept. But it was another monster that, design-wise, was a very good creation, not just physically, but even the story behind it, as it linked to prior movies in the Heisei era. Godzilla cells going into space via either Mothra or Biollante, and then creating what essentially was a Godzilla that could live in space, that harnessed its powers from the black hole. I mean, you really have to have a fantastic imagination to come up with something like this. And even though it sounds crazy and it's a little far-fetched, or it's a little psychotic, maybe some would argue, it kept the movies fresh, which is why the Heisei series for Godzilla is just one of the best eras, or probably the best era, because you got monsters like Biollante, because you got monsters like Spacegodzilla that were so far out there, but you could still appreciate how original some of these monsters could be after so many movies, even up to this point. I mean, while we did get some great original monsters in the Heisei series, Toho did find the need to kind of repeat some of their former hits like Ghidorah and Mothra. But Spacegodzilla will, as well with Biollante, remain as one of the more unique, far-out creations Toho's ever had, and we can only hope that this monster gets another opportunity to shine on the silver screen. If not, we at least have one movie to remember him by and to appreciate. But if we get to see him again, I would love to see exactly what Toho is going to pull out of their hat, because Spacegodzilla does have a special place in many fans' heart as a counter, as just an actual evil counter to Godzilla. You know, he's not even an unsung hero, and he's not an anti-hero. He is just evil, and he's destructive. So if we ever get to see him again, it would be nice, and I hope that Toho would do a great movie with him and have an epic fight with Godzilla. But until then, we'll just have to wait and see what the plans they have for the future. I hope you enjoyed this episode of 30 for 30, and please once again come back tomorrow as we continue the series and the days count away as we head towards Godzilla King of the Monsters. This is Rob signing off for E.T.N, where we don't do news, we just talk entertainment. Take it easy.
Thank you for watching E.T.N. Don't forget to subscribe and join the Nation Facebook page.